Your phone is a dead object. For 15 years, we've accepted the same deal, a static slab of glass that does absolutely nothing until you touch it. But imagine something different. A notification hits your desk. The device doesn't just light up, it moves. A motorized limb deploys. A camera pivots toward you. A task finishes before your thumb even reaches the screen. This is what Honor calls the robot phone. To most people, Honor is just another Chinese smartphone brand, but its story begins with one of the most dramatic corporate breakups in the tech industry and one of the most unlikely comebacks. In November 2020, a global tech empire performs a radical act of self-amputation. Under the crushing weight of US sanctions, Huawei sold its most successful sub-brand, Honor, for $15 billion. On paper, it looked like a clean break. In reality, it looked like a death sentence. Within months, Honor's market share in China collapsed from 17% to barely 3%. The industry wrote them off. Critics called it a zombie brand, a Huawei Lite stripped of its chips, its software, and its future. But 6 years later, those same critics were standing in a crowded hall at the Mobile World Congress. They weren't looking at a phone that displayed apps. They were watching a phone that could act on its own. This wasn't a typical comeback. It was a structural coup, and to understand how it happened, you need to understand what George Zhao found when he walked into Honor's headquarters on day one. In late 2020, George Zhao, a 20-year Huawei veteran, suddenly became the CEO of a startup with 8,000 employees and no inventory. No Qualcomm chips, no Google services, no guaranteed manufacturing pipeline. The sanctions had severed everything. But Huawei didn't just sell Honor the brand, it sold them the people. Thousands of engineers, product managers, and supply chain veterans transferred with the company. The institutional knowledge survived even when the supply chain didn't. Zhao had a choice. He could use that talent to rebuild a safer, cheaper Honor. Mid-range phones, predictable margins, slow survival. Or he could use this forced independence to attack a deeper weakness in the smartphone industry itself. He chose the harder path. But first, he had to keep the lights on. In early 2021, Honor's first move wasn't a flagship, it was a handshake. Zhao flew to Qualcomm, MediaTek, and Microsoft. He needed to prove Honor was no longer a Huawei proxy, that it was a genuinely independent company operating outside the sanctions perimeter. It worked. Within months, Honor had secured chip supply agreements that Huawei itself could no longer access. The irony was brutal. The amputation had given Honor something its former parent had lost, the freedom to buy Western technology. Then came the ownership structure that nobody talks about. Instead of seeking outside investors or going public, Zhao structured Honor around a consortium, roughly 30 distributors and retail partners who collectively owned the company. This wasn't just a financial decision, it was a strategic one. Those 30 partners had warehouses, retail floors, and direct lines into Chinese consumers. When Honor needed to move inventory fast, they didn't need a sales force. They already had one. The Honor 50 launched in mid-2021, the first phone built under the new independence, with full Google mobile services restored. It wasn't a revolution, it was a signal. Honor was back in the global ecosystem. Over the next 2 years, Honor executed quietly. Mid-range devices, competitive prices, steady market share recovery. The company climbed from 3% back toward double digits not through a single breakthrough product, but through relentless execution across every price tier. By 2023, Honor had reclaimed the #2 position in China's foldable market. They had rebuilt a real company from scratch, with better supply chain access than Huawei, a leaner ownership structure than Samsung, and a workforce that had been trained inside one of the most technically ambitious organizations in the world. That foundation is what made everything that followed possible. By the time Honor had stabilized its business, Zhao turned his attention to the bigger question. Why? After 15 years of smartphone progress, do we still navigate the same way? Want a ride? Open a ride-hailing app. Want coffee? Open a delivery app. Want to schedule a meeting? Open your calendar. Each action requires navigating a different digital silo. Tap, search, scroll, confirm. We have turned into manual laborers for our own devices. Despite all the progress in hardware, we are still trapped inside a user interface that hasn't fundamentally changed since the original iPhone in 2007. Zhao saw that friction as an opportunity. The app wasn't the solution. The app was the problem, and Honor's first answer was Magic Portal. The portal acts as a contextual layer across the phone. Imagine you copy an address from a message. Instead of manually switching apps, you drag it to the edge of the screen. The phone predicts your intent. Need a ride? Need directions? Need restaurant recommendations? The system connects those services instantly. What used to require 10 manual steps becomes a single motion. But Magic Portal was just the beginning. The real breakthrough came when the hardware finally caught up. By 2024, smartphone processors had evolved to include powerful neural processing units, NPUs, powerful enough to run serious AI workloads locally. That allowed Honor to run a 7 billion parameter model directly on the device. This unlocked Honor's most aggressive feature, the YOYO Agent, what Honor calls a digital pilot. While Apple was making Siri better at conversation, Honor focused on something different entirely: execution. YOYO doesn't just answer questions, it performs tasks. The system uses computer vision to read the screen of other apps, buttons, menus, settings, exactly the way a human would. Tell it, cancel all my subscriptions. The agent opens the relevant apps, navigates through settings, finds the cancellation pages, and completes the process automatically. And that changes the balance of power. Because if an AI agent can operate your apps for you, the apps themselves lose their dominance. They become utilities. Honor isn't just selling a phone anymore. They're selling a system that makes the app icon itself obsolete. But a digital pilot needs more than software. It needs a body. While Apple was rumored to be building tabletop robots and Xiaomi was constructing mechanical dogs, Honor realized something more fundamental. The only robot that matters is the one already in your pocket. At MWC 2026, Honor unveiled the robot phone, built around a self-developed micromotor and an ultra-compact 4-degree of freedom gimbal system, designed to bring robot-grade motion control into a device that fits in your hand. The phone gained motorized stabilization and gaze-tracking sensors. The camera could physically adjust to follow a subject. Notifications could expand based on where you were looking. A task could be completed before you even reached for the screen. The smartphone stopped being a screen. It became a machine. Honor's comeback created new enemies. Super app giants like Tencent and Meta are already watching. If an AI agent bypasses their interfaces, they lose their most valuable asset, user attention. When they lose attention, they lose data. When they lose data, they lose ads. Some companies are already experimenting with ways to block automated agents from navigating inside their apps. A new conflict is forming: the pilot versus the walled garden. And geopolitics still looms. Honor remains dependent on Western Silicon and Google's ecosystem. Its rise as the global alternative to Huawei ensures that scrutiny will follow wherever it expands. But the deeper transformation goes beyond one company. As phones gain the ability to see, decide, and act, the competition shifts. It is no longer about megapixels or screen brightness. It is about who controls the decision-making layer of your digital life. Honor spent its first 2 years after the breakup proving it could survive. Its next 2 years proving it could compete. And now it is betting the entire company on a single belief: the era of the app is ending. The era of the agent is beginning. The next decade will not be won by the company with the thinnest glass. It will be won by whoever builds the most trusted personal agent. A device that doesn't just show you the world, but moves inside it for you. Because once your phone stops waiting for your commands, the real question isn't whether it can act on your behalf. It's whether you're ready to let it.